Welcome, class, to Introduction to Monotheism. So, for the last week or so, we have been going over world religions, begun by talking about polytheism, religions that worship a grand multitude of gods. Then we moved into the dharmic religions with their concepts of dharma, karma, moksha, and nirvana. Now, we're going to return from India back to the Middle East, back to the Mediterranean, for our discussion of monotheism, religions that only worship a single god. And before we delve into any specific monotheism like Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, we're going to first go over the general concept of monotheism and possible theories on how it is that monotheism came to be. So let's begin. Now, one thing that often strikes many people as odd is that historians are in general consensus that polytheism came first, and that monotheism came later. What's not so clear is the process by which monotheism came about. Because we know that we had a societies developed that worshiped a grand multitude of gods. And at some point, those societies begin to give way to religions that worship a single god alone. So what leads to this transition? What leads human beings from a system in which multiple gods are worshipped to a system in which but a single god is considered to exist? So, one gentleman who first attempts to answer this question in a historical, scientific way is Julius Wellhausen. He's a German Bible scholar from the 19th century. He is the son of a former reverend and was originally bound for seminary himself to become a Lutheran minister before he decided to pursue biblical archaeology as his career path instead. This is important, as it does give us some hint at his possible biases, particularly the fact that because he decided to leave a more faith-based explanation of the Bible for a more secular exploration of the Bible, he might have an overly critical bias. That's what a lot of later historians have said about him, that he tends to be almost condescending in his tone towards the early Israelite people and things like that, due to this possible bias. Now, he's the author of what's called the documentary hypothesis, and we're going to go over the documentary hypothesis shortly. But before we do, we first have to talk about his theory on the evolutionary theory of monotheism, and exactly how that works, and some possible alternatives to it. So let's move forward. So what is the evolutionary theory of monotheism? So, Wellhausen proposed that monotheism, religions that worship a single god, evolved from polytheism. And by evolved, he means that they changed very slowly, going through a series of intermediate steps. He believed these steps to begin with polytheism, then moving into a state called henotheism, followed by monolatry, and with monotheism following as the end product. So, you're probably at this point going, what exactly is henotheism and monolatry? Be honest, most people are not familiar with these terms. This is actually going a little bit over Global 9 level. We're now entering college territory. But I think it's an interesting way to get your head around how this theory works. So, henotheism. The idea behind henotheism, it's more theoretical. It's not entirely clear if any henotheistic religions exist now or exactly if they did in the past. It's an idea that exists more in theory. So what henotheism is the idea in which a religion believes that while other gods exist, only one god is the patron of that religion or of that society. Now, we do see things that kind of resemble this in polytheism. For example, many cities had patron gods, particularly in Greece. So Athena was considered the patron of Athens, for example. So an Athenian would believe that Athena would have a particular care about the Athenians and the welfare of Athens, and might get a little more heavier worship in Athens than other gods. For example, the incredibly large, glorious Parthenon Parthenon, that's built in the Acropolis and all that's built, was specifically a temple to Athena. Now, the idea is that, so this group of people does not deny the existence that other gods may well exist out there in the universe, but they think that only a particular god cares for them, and thus would be the one that is worshipped by that society. So, what is the evidence that's often cited to suggest this hypothesis? And the theory lies on certain quotes that are found in the older portions of Jewish scripture, since the Torah is probably one of the older parts of any holy book. It's the oldest part of it. It's one of the older parts of the Bible. It's considerably older than the Quran. So, if you're looking for questions on the origin of monotheism, this is some of the earliest texts we're dealing with. And in that particular text, there's a line which is usually translated as something to this effect of, "Who is like you among the gods, O Lord?" It may be translated differently in different translations. The original Hebrew is something along the lines of, Mi kamoka ba'elim Adonai. Note, the actual translation is the Yud Hey Vav Hey. We'll go over that a little later. That gets, again, this is getting a little into college territory, but since we're dealing with a complicated subject like world religions, and it's one that is going to come up a little more in your life as you deal with different people with different religions, the extra detail is more than necessary. This is it down here in Hebrew, in case you're interested in understanding what it is I just said, or finding someone who can maybe pronounce it better than I can. So, that's the original line. And that's interesting because the word Elim, that's El, the word for God in Hebrew, and the Im connotates that it's plural. So, that's an interesting concept. So, the first thing a lot of people do when they look at this thing, wait, why is a monotheistic religion include the word gods in a religious text? That's a weird thing for a monotheistic religion to do. And those who advance the henotheism theory argued that at this stage in the Israelite development, they were not truly monotheists, that they were henotheists, meaning that while they did not deny that other gods might exist, they believed that only this particular god actually cared for them. I'll discuss some of the details of this theory, but that's Wellhausen's theory. Now, the next stage is what's called monolatry. He believed that at this point, a culture still believes that multiple gods exist out in the world, but now they're convinced that their god in particular, their patron god, is stronger and better than any of the other ones. And usually he argues that you'll see evidence of boasting where they talk about how mighty their god is over the others. After this, so this is the general review. So you'd have polytheism. Culture believes in multiple gods, which control the natural forces of the world. Different gods must be worshipped in order to influence different forces. We did that already. Then henotheism. This is what Wellhausen thinks comes next. That a culture believes in the existence of multiple gods which control the natural forces of the world. However, that they believe only one god cares for the culture and is thus worshipped by them. Monolatry. He argued that at this point the culture still believes multiple gods exist in the world, but that the god which they worship is superior to all the other ones. And then Wellhausen thought that this was followed by monotheism, where the culture believed exclusively in the existence of a single god, and denied the existence of the other gods. So that's the evolutionary theory of monotheism. There are going to be a few problems with it that we're going to get into. But first, we got to talk about the revolutionary theory of monotheism. This is the alternate idea about how it is that monotheisms developed after the advent of polytheism. So, one thing that's noted by a lot of religious scholars is that all the mature polytheistic religions feature a belief in an underlying unity behind the multiple gods. This is often addressed as a creator of the gods. So, Ptah in Egyptian pantheon, Saturn, or Kronos in the Roman or Greek pantheon, etc. And usually this is a matter of very little importance. So the main goal in polytheism is you're trying to influence the various gods that control the various natural forces that are affecting your life. So the idea that somewhere behind all of it there is a unity, that really doesn't matter to you unless you're in like a high priesthood. Then you might care. But the average polytheist could care less. Now, well, that's the case in polytheism. In monotheism, it makes the unity behind all the natural forces the focus rather than the multiplicity of those focuses. So in polytheism, you have this idea that you have all these various natural forces out there in the world, and humans are trying to control each and every one of them. The main focus is on these various natural forces. The sun, the water, war, love, stuff like that. And there's this kind of underlying idea that behind all of it, somewhere in the background, all of these things are interconnected or have some common origin point. But no one really cares so much about that. Monotheism, different story. It's whatever it is that's behind all these natural forces that's of the main focus. It's sort of a change in the definition of what exactly a god is. So in polytheism, a natural force is equated with the god. The sun is a god. The wind is a god. War is a god. Love is a goddess. Etc., 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 on down the line. In monotheism, the individual natural forces are not perceived as being a god. Rather, each natural force is subservient or is controlled by a single god that sort of is behind it all. So it's a change in focus. In polytheism, if it's a natural force that affects the human world, it's a god. Monotheism, that doesn't necessarily cut it. So now this leads into this weird question. This is the thing that gets scholars of this period into heated debates. Is this central issue of, so did the theology evolve or did the language? And this is the issue. So let's go back to that often cited quote, who is like you among the gods, O Lord, the Mi kamak ba'elim Adonai. That business in Hebrew, right over here. So the question is the above proof that the Israelites believed in multiple gods? The problem is with the word Elim. It can be translated as gods, but it could also be translated as natural forces. Because if you are coming out of a society that previously had polytheistic tendencies, this society, the language is already going to exist. So we know there were Canaanites long before the emergence of anything that we could consider Israel. Or at the very least, they existed alongside them in the earliest period. And we know that the language is old enough to have been around and to have had a polytheistic connotation. The Canaanites use the same language. So we know from their use of it that the word El, as it's translated now, could also be used to had that polytheistic connotation where it could mean a god, it could also mean a natural force. In polytheism, they're the same thing. So this is the issue, that until monotheism existed, languages really didn't bother to develop a word for a natural force that was independent for the name of a god. That really wasn't a necessary development. So it really never occurred until there was a need for it. The whole necessity is the mother of invention. If your natural forces are all gods, then the name of the god is good enough for the name of the natural force, because they're the same thing. It's only when you start thinking that, no, the natural forces are not gods, but all obey a single god, then you're like, oh, well, then I need words to describe in general what these forces are, and then specifically what is a sun, what is a moon, what is water, what is war, what is love, blah, 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 blah. That now becomes necessary. Until you get to that point, you don't really need that. You won't usually go making up words if they don't need them. So, the evolution of language. So in polytheistic cultures, remember, the name of the natural forces were the gods. They shared the same name. So this symbol over here refers to Ra,